Somsak also reported the construction workers for misconduct at her home. After the police investigated, looking through surveillance footage, talking to neighbors, and getting a confession from Deovon, they found out there were 4 construction workers involved. Even though they all worked in construction, they didn't know each other because they were assigned to different building sites. Their bosses weren't the same either, and they would only occasionally cross paths when they stopped by Fimpha's place. However, they all admitted that it was Deovon who had seduced them at first, and eventually, they all gave in. Hey there, welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving into another shocking real-life story from our world. This one comes straight from Hai Duong, Vietnam. It's a story that'll keep you on the edge of your seat. It's thrilling, but also a bit unsettling. You've got a beautiful wife, 2 kids, a handsome husband with a great job. Everything seems perfect, right? But, unfortunately, the wife has been unfaithful, even before she left her job. So, what's the full story behind this? Let's dig deeper and break it down together. Let me introduce you to a fascinating woman today. Her name is Deovon, born in 1988 in Phong Van, Vietnam. From the start, she stood out. She graduated with top honors from her college and quickly rose to the top of her field. After graduation, she began working as a back-office employee at a commercial bank branch in Hai Duong, where her performance earned her the title of Employee of the Year. In 2011, a friend introduced her to a guy named Somsak, who was 2 years older than her. He worked at an international medical machinery and equipment company. He was a quiet, somewhat nerdy guy, but he came from a wealthy family. The two of them hit it off, and by June 2012, they were married. Somsak was 26, and Deovon was 24. Their marriage seemed perfect. They lived in a beautiful, upscale area of Nam Dinh, and Somsak supported Deovon's career, encouraging her to keep working instead of staying home. Then, in early 2014, they were blessed with a lovely daughter, followed by a son in mid-2015. Deovon, ever the determined woman, returned to work just 4 months after her second child was born. Her children were cared for by her in-laws and a babysitter. Even after having 2 kids, Deovon still looked just as stunning and slim as she did before. It seemed like she had it all: an active lifestyle, a healthy diet, and good habits. But things took an unexpected turn in early 2016. A new guy named Seng Dao joined the bank where Deovon worked. He was 27 and, no surprise here, was immediately attracted to her beauty. At first, he didn't even believe she was married and had kids, until his co-workers let him in on the secret. But instead of backing off, Seng Dao began flirting with her. What's shocking is that Deovon didn't seem to mind at all. In fact, she welcomed his attention, and the two started a secret affair outside of work hours. Soon, Deovon's late nights at work became more frequent. She would come home well after dark, often with elaborate excuses: meetings, urgent clients, things that couldn't be done at home. But Somsak started to grow suspicious. He contacted one of Deovon's co-workers and found out that she wasn't staying late at all. In fact, she was often leaving work early, around 4 p.m. Somsak decided to take matters into his own hands. He did some digging and, sure enough, caught Deovon and Seng Dao together at a hotel just 5 kilometers from her office. It hit him hard. He was devastated, heartbroken, but his concern for their young children held him back from making any rash decisions. He was also frequently traveling for work, which only added to the tension. Eventually, the families got involved, and after some serious discussions, Somsak and Deovon decided to try to work things out. The agreement was that Deovon would give up her phone, step away from social media for a year, quit her job, and focus on her children at home. Everyone agreed to the terms, and in 2017, Somsak sold their house, and the family relocated to Hai Duong to start fresh. If you look at the area of Hai Duong City where Somsak's new house is located, you'll notice it's still a work in progress. The housing complex is only about 35% occupied, with the rest of it still under construction. Even so, there are already hundreds of homes in the area. It's starting to feel like a real community, with neighbors, mini markets, schools, playgrounds, and even a few offices. Since 2019, after the old babysitter returned home, the family hired a new helper, Fimfa, who's 30 years old. Fimfa doesn't have a background in childcare, but she helps out with cooking and cleaning since the kids are already 5 and 4. Deovon, no longer working, now takes care of the children directly. So, the family's been living with Fimfa ever since. As for Samsak and Deovon's relationship, things have been getting better. He's been taking her out for surprise candlelit dinners at fancy restaurants, doing everything he can to keep their romance alive. It's like he's aware that Deovon is still incredibly beautiful and needs a little extra attention. And Deovon, for her part, has become much more loyal and focused on her family. She's even adjusted to not having a phone anymore. Although Samsak told her she could go back to using social media if she wanted, she only occasionally checks in with a few friends and family on Facebook and Instagram. Fast forward to January 2020. Samsak got another work assignment abroad, so he started traveling to Malaysia and the Philippines for work. Sometimes he'd be gone for 2 to 3 weeks at a time. But he trusted his wife, so he'd leave feeling secure about things at home. During this time, however, Fimfa, their assistant, started developing a relationship with one of the construction workers working on the housing complex. His name was Kamfang, and he was 7 years younger than her. At first, they'd just hang out on the terrace, but before long, Fimfa invited him into the dining room. Deovon didn't think much of it at first, even when she asked, "Are you guys dating?" The two of them shyly answered, "Just friends." A few weeks later, Fimfa invited another man over. His name was Sambaun, a 24-year-old construction worker from the eastern side of the neighborhood. He didn't know Kamfang, but it was clear that the two were getting close. Deovon could see the two of them getting a little too familiar, and she just shook her head at Fimfa's behavior. She thought, as long as they were all single, and nothing inappropriate happened at home, it was fine. The only thing she cared about was that the kids didn't see anything strange. It became a bit of a pattern. Fimfa started bringing different male friends over, and Deovon's kids got used to the construction workers hanging around. The workers would often bring candy and ice cream as a kind of dating gift, which the kids loved. But it was clear that Fimfa's personal life was starting to blend in with the family's everyday routine. In early July 2020, Fimfa asked for a week off to visit her village, and since she'd been working for over a year without any time off, her employer's mother agreed. It was a rare chance for Fimfa to go back home. Around that time, Samsak had been traveling frequently to Thailand for a project involving MRI equipment for a hospital there. So, while he was away, the construction workers began showing up at the house, looking for Fimfa. When a week passed and Fimfa still hadn't returned, and her phone was unreachable, it started to raise some concerns for Deovon. Why hadn't Fimfa come back? She even started chatting with some of Fimfa's boyfriends about the situation. After talking to them for a while, since she'd known them for about 7 months, Deovon felt comfortable enough to exchange numbers with them. Then, on Thursday, October 17, 2020, a woman named Samthon, who was 51, and her 16-year-old daughter Malini showed up at the house in the Hai Duong housing complex where renovations were happening. Samthon was upset when she found out that one of the workers, a 26-year-old man named Kamfei, had skipped work. But his friend explained, "He didn't skip work, Mom. He's at his girlfriend's house, number 78G. Naturally, Samthon decided to check it out, so she and her daughter went over to the house. It turned out to be Deovon's house, but the door was locked. They walked around to the side of the house, figuring that Kamfei was probably in the kitchen with his girlfriend, Fimfa. As they passed by the side window, they got the shock of their lives. The curtains were half open, and through the gap, they saw Camfe and Deovon, not just talking, but making out. Stunned and caught off guard, Soundthone and her daughter quickly ran away, not sure how to react. Although Soundthone didn't know Deovon personally, she was sure the woman she'd seen through the window wasn't the maid. It had to be the lady of the house. So, she asked around with the housing management and found out that the house was owned by Samsak and Deovon. The woman she'd seen behind the curtain with Camfe matched the description of Deovon. Soundthone was determined to get Samsak's phone number, so she pushed the housing management to give it to her. At first, they refused, but when she threatened to call the police about all the strange things happening in the housing complex, they finally gave in. Soundthone immediately contacted Samsak and told him everything she had seen. She even suggested that he check the surveillance cameras at the house if they had them. Samsak agreed to look into it and planned to return home to Haiduan on November 5, 2020. When he got back and checked the footage, he was shocked to discover that the cameras hadn't recorded anything for the past 10 days. Furious, he confronted Deovon, but she claimed that the cameras must have been broken. The next day, on November 6, 2020, he went to the housing management office to ask about the footage from the cameras on the street near his gate. They showed him the recordings, and sure enough, over the last 10 days, 4 men had entered his house at different times, both in the afternoon and evening, and stayed for 2 to 3 hours before leaving. Samsak was certain these men were meeting with his wife, especially since Fimfa had been gone for 2 months. The only people in the house at the time were Deovon and their young children. Samsak was beyond upset when he got home. He demanded answers from Deovon, but she couldn't explain why these men had been in their house for so long. She could only cry and apologize. In a fit of anger, Samsak grabbed her by the neck, pushing her so hard that she went limp. When she managed to break free, Deovon ran to the kitchen, grabbed a knife, and lashed out at Samsak's chest. The blow caused him to faint. In a panic, Deovon fled the house and called the neighbors for help. They rushed to the scene and quickly took Samsak to the nearest hospital. Meanwhile, Deovon called her mother, left the children behind, and turned herself in to the authorities. An investigation followed. Samsak spent nearly a week in the hospital, but fortunately, his life was saved. He was crushed not just by the fact that his wife had betrayed him again, but also by the way her actions had been exposed to the neighbors, all because of Soundthone's report. This wasn't the first time Deovon had been unfaithful, and he was devastated that he couldn't trust her. Deovon apologized profusely, explaining that her husband's frequent absences for work overseas had driven her to seek comfort in the attention of the young men who worked as construction laborers. Over time, she and these men had become close, chatting regularly, and eventually, she had developed feelings for them. The men, aged between 24 and 26, had been more than just friends. Her emotional needs were met by them, which led her down this destructive path. Samsak decided to report the construction workers for their misconduct at his home. After a thorough investigation by the police, which included reviewing surveillance footage, talking to neighbors, and getting Deovon's confession, it became clear that 4 construction workers had been visiting her regularly. They were Kamfeng, 25, Samban, 24, Kamfe, 26, and Fadhaving, 24. Even though they all worked in construction, they didn't know each other because they were assigned to different buildings. They worked for different bosses and came by at various times, mostly to see Fimfa, the assistant. However, the workers admitted that it was Deovon who had initially made advances toward them. They said they eventually gave in, but Deovon denied this, insisting it wasn't how things happened. Deovon's lawyer argued that she never meant to harm her husband that night. The defense painted the situation as an act of self-defense, with Deovon portrayed as a vulnerable woman just trying to protect herself. This was the argument they used to minimize the punishment, and in the end, it seemed to convince Samsak, who was still emotional from the situation. It wasn't until March 21, 2021, at the Haiduong City High Court that the judge found Daovon guilty of second-degree felony charges related to self-defense and assault. She was sentenced to 2 years in prison, with an additional 4 months for misconduct. The 4 construction workers, Kamfeng, Sumban, Kamfei, and Fat Habing, were also convicted of misconduct and each received a 6-week sentence. They weren't placed in the same cell, though. As for Somsak, he had to move back in with his parents so his children could be cared for while he traveled for work. He appreciated Soundthone, the woman who had initially uncovered everything. Although she could be sarcastic, her actions ultimately exposed the truth and, in the end, helped him. Meanwhile, Phimfa, the assistant, disappeared without a trace and hasn't been heard from since. What lessons can we learn from this story?